I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we are moving on up and moving on out, because I am done talking about the race war for the time being, and the riots and the protests and all of it, because, you know, as noted, the virtue signal is going to keep on going until basically it loses enough steam and psychic attention and, you know, focus that basically people will move on to the next thing. And of course it's an election year, so they will find a new, you know, key to jingle, right? Jingle the keys, name of the game for the low IQ Boobus Americanus who basically believes what the media tells them, right? Of all ages, from millennials to boomers, anybody who believes what the TV tells them is absolutely a Boobus Americanus and is devoid of a human brain and has moved back in evolutionary timescales, right? So whereas the rest of us are still using our brains and we're rolling on forward, like I said, moving on up, moving on now, right on through the DNA helix. That's what's going down, because again, all the glory is proceeding apace. Do not get bogged down in the craziness. That is the whole point of the narrative, and the Hegelian dialectic is to keep you inside of it. It doesn't matter ultimately which side you're on, and why, again, you know, I've definitely picked a side in a sense, but it's not like that's my identity, right? I support President Trump, but I do not support him unquestioningly. I've just learned to kind of trust him, whereas before I really didn't trust him. But through all the different, you know, events, I think that at least to a small extent I can trust him. I can at least trust him to correct mistakes and really to check the pulse of the public, whereas I'd never really got that sense with any other politician before. And he's not, again, politician. His social media was his claim to fame. He used social media so effectively that they are now destroying the platforms basically to prevent a similar ascendance, right? He completely owned them on their own platform, regardless of what you think of him. Donald Trump is basically the one man who both won and broke Twitter because he used it against the wishes of the creators to take the office, right? Regardless of whether or not you believe Trump's just all part of a huge conspiracy and everything, including, you know, my farts at the end of the day are controlled by the Illuminati, then, you know, you believe what you believe. But, you know, I believe that nobody controls the entire universe except for God. And even then, we're allowed a certain amount of latitude as creatures in fractal resonance with that creator, right? Certainly more than a dog or, you know, a lizard or an ape. But, you know, it's just very interesting. I thought I'd share a story today about just a funny story from right before I left the house. You know, we've got a certain family member visiting who very much believes in the media program and is, you know, a solid blue team, you know, active supporter. And basically, you know, Isla and I watch Suspicious Observers every day, the daily, you know, space weather news update. You know, a lot of you guys are probably already aware. If you're not, Suspicious Observers is basically a great channel by a guy named Ben Davidson. He has a legal background, but basically through the research projects that he was working on, I think in the course of his line of work, he basically came upon the topic of the sun. And the sun is a new real topic of discussion. You know, with the exception of counting sunspots, we really didn't understand very much about the sun until the last few decades. And now a lot of that information is open source, and so anybody can really learn all about how the sun works by reading, you know, the data as it comes out. And, you know, it's very intuitive and easy to understand. That's what's great about plasma physics, is it's so intuitive and you can really see and feel physics, and you can understand it from a very, like, visceral, visual point of view, rather than the you know, view of physics taught in the universities and the schools today, which is very much calculators and, you know, lines and on graph paper. And it's not, it can be intuitive, but it's not naturally intuitive. But, you know, again, as Ken Wheeler likes to say, nature is not a nerd with a pocket protector and a calculator. It's a crazy-haired hippie lady taking all kinds of plant substances and dancing around, right? And that's a perfect description of plasma movement, is like a crazy hippie lady dancing around. You know, Suspicious Observers, anyway, he does daily updates where he looks at the weather all over the world. He looks at the solar weather indices, right, what the solar wind looks like, because we're being constantly bombarded by particles from space all the time. But because of the Earth's magnetic field, right, its plasma sheath, if you will, it, you know, deflects it and absorbs it and routes it through the poles. And basically, you know, it's got this whole energetic system that we can't necessarily see, but we are a part of it, and it does affect our health. Is basically one of the topic avenues that he's covered is basically the health effects of space weather, and all these things are scientific, peer-reviewed. It's emergent science for sure. It's not like well developed, because this is applying the new technologies that we've gained in the last few decades with the digital revolution. But anybody can find these things, and it's far from conspiratorial. It's all very open source and scientific. A lot of the science is coming out of Asia, because they have more of an open mind about a lot of things that in the West we've kind of closed ourselves off to. Especially liberals, they like to pretend like they're very open-minded and very intelligent and academic and educated, but they're actually basically, again, it's a very troglodyte, stunted worldview that can't even accept the possibility of an alternative theory about the world being proffered, right? It's like, use an extreme example of flat Earth, right? Flat Earth is, false. It's provably false. There's lots of people on the internet who believe it. But would I support basically making it illegal to speak about false Earth? Would I get offended that somebody brings it up and believes that? No. Like, why would I get mad? Why would I get offended? Why would I try and squelch their speech unless they're saying something absolutely, like, harmably, false about myself? Like something that would be a crime. That would be libel or slander, right? And we have laws for that. But, if people want to believe what they want to believe, if they're peaceful and they're just doing their own thing, then let them believe. But the liberal program cannot accept of this, right? The Marxist program cannot accept of any dissent. It must basically extract compliance out of people, regardless, because you can't have freedom coexist with, basically slavery. The one will eventually cancel out the other. So it's this, perennial battle, this metaphysical battle against the few who are alive and awake and fractal resonators of the Creator and hyper powerful and hyper intelligent. And then basically you have the great mass of slaves, which are all trying to hold them down and basically, squelch the discussion. And, Galileo did, back when the world was flat Earth, and, Galileo was like, no, I think not only is it not flat, it's basically round, and, it's going around the sun. The sun's not going around us, right? And they couldn't even tolerate of discussion because it was a deeply fundamentalist religious mentality and not a rational perspective. And so basically he was a threat to the worldview. And so basically, we stunted science back then hundreds of years ago because people were uncomfortable with the truth. Maybe the average person wasn't even uncomfortable with it, but the people who were deriving benefits and in positions of power within that system, they were all very threatened by it. And so basically they, forced him to recant and threw him in jail. And I think Galileo eventually got killed, right? But I'm not a history major, but I just remember things. But, it's just the reason I bring all this up is because, Isla and I watch the Space Weather News update every day, and it's just kind of a fun little thing. I got her the Kira and Lulu books from their website. It's basically these two books, Kira and Lulu Visit the Sun, and Kira and Lulu Visit the Planets. And it's just a cool little kid's book, and, it introduces them to essentially solar flares and space weather and the solar wind. It's just a young kid's book. It doesn't get into depth, but, they fly into space and they get to watch a solar flare leaving the sun and hitting the Earth and causing the aurora borealis. Like, that's cool. I've never I found another book that introduced kids to the physics of the aurora borealis in such a fun and simple way. So, again, the new world is being created. You got to keep your eye to the skies and keep your soul lifted, because otherwise this world will drag you down. Especially the crab in a bucket mentality, who that dominates the Marxist worldview, and especially this whole Black Lives Matter thing is very much a crab in the bucket. We all need to pull each other down, right? Because any differential in outcome must, by definition, be the result of institutional structural racism. Because a priori, we know that people are all the same, don't we? We know that, right? No, we don't know that, because it's not even true, and it never will be true. And so we automatically assume that something is the result of, because we're automatically ruling out, option B. And it's funny, just again, because this is the exact same mentality with the social realm and this whole race thing as it is in science, right? They categorically exclude the sun as the cause of climate change. And so basically, any climate change we do experience must by definition be human caused, anthropogenic, right? So it's only because we've absolutely categorically, assumed that A is not correct that we know that it must be B, right? But the problem is that the model is so absolutely hilariously pathetic. And again, as Joseph Postma has pointed out, an astrophysicist, and he called them out, and they basically, in their model, they assume that the sun basically does not heat the Earth. They average it over the entire surface area of the Earth as if it was a flat plane, and basically that's the representation of sun in their model. And so they artificially make the sun's input into basically a flat line, and then they say, see, the sun's input is basically a flat line, so it couldn't be affecting this variable climate. So therefore, look, we increase the carbon, it must be the carbon. That is the only logic underpinning this whole thing. And it's based on this, just crayon level model that absolutely does not understand the sun. And this YouTube channel, and Ben Davidson understands the sun, even though he is not a trained solar scientist in the universities. He absolutely knows more about the sun than the entire IPCC, climate panel at the UN combined, without doubt. There's not even a shred of doubt in that statement. It is absolutely a fact. Because the model is so hilariously stunted, it doesn't take very much. Even my daughter, by the time she makes it to 3 years old, will understand the sun better than the IPCC. And so, again, returning to the story, family member is visiting, and Isla and I are watching, space news, and this is kind of the second day that the visit has, that the visitor has been here, and, we've been watching this, and asking a lot of questions about, who is this person? Is he a scientist? So, where did you find this channel? And just kind of probing questions. And Ben, just as a daily science update, but is very, by necessity woke to the whole climate scam and, exactly what we've just been talking about. And so basically, in his daily update, he shows basically the new UN, Sustainable Development 2030 website, and it's basically New World Order 2030, and they're basically talking about happiness capitalism and 10 billion people. We're looking forward to 10 billion people, and we want them all to be happy and living in UN socialism. And he kind of straight up called it out. It's like, well, New World Order is literally what they're calling it, and they're talking about 10 billion people living in happinism. Right, it's basically just the UN's new try to rebrand communism for the next decade of vaccine push and, authoritarian speech crackdowns and, a whole bunch of market manipulations and moving towards, the one world currency and buying people's consent with the universal basic income, right, and making everyone the global serf class and a great global extractor class of the usual suspects and their progeny, right? But nothing is certain, and this game is far from concluded. And so it's just kind of funny because this visitor basically then was like, oh, so this channel, okay, it's not just science, it gets political. And Space Panther was like, well, science is very politicized these days, and she kind of stormed off and went to the bathroom and took a shower. But it's just kind of funny that we're basically just watching this daily update channel about space weather, and he made kind of like a casual passing reference and showed basically their own website that basically says New World Order 2030, that's their name for it. Non-conspiratorial. This is what they are basically saying it is. And just like Lori Lightfoot, we need to pledge allegiance to the New World Order. They're just like George Bush Sr. He was the one who kind of coined the term and back in the 90s in a speech about how we'll have a New World Order. And, it's not even conspiratorial anymore. The average person doesn't think this is conspiratorial. And that's where they've really lost. And that's why they're freaking out, because they know that the narrative is totally out of their hands. And the dog has slipped the chain, if you will, and the horses have left the stable. And so they're basically hoping and praying that it goes in a direction that, at least somewhat favors their goals, the Matrix programmers' goals, which of course all the people who believe in it think that are their goals, right? The average climate cultist really thinks that, they have an interest in fighting climate change and, going along with this whole thing, but it's really just a social gratification scheme. It is a replacement for religion without a God, right? And the state becomes the God. The global state becomes the all-powerful entity. But the problem with that is that the state, even global in scale, is not an all-powerful entity. And, history shows again and again how nature points out the folly of man, Godzilla, right? Except it's not Godzilla, it's God. And it's the perfect order underlying the creator's creation, right? And so it's just kind of funny, again, I at this point, I don't need to get mad. I don't need to, fight with anybody. I have my daughters. I have the future, and it doesn't matter what the past believes, and it doesn't matter what, the televised boomers believe about a thing because, well, it's totally immaterial. It has no standing. It's inconsequential and irrelevant. And so I'm going to keep enjoying life with my family and proceeding on what effectively is an alternate timeline, right? It's as if, this whole century, we can just rewind the tape and just basically delete it, Instead of Edison, we went with Tesla, there was no world wars, and, cannabis was never made illegal. Hemp became the prime agricultural commodity of the planet. We figured out superconductive graphene, and so we made, electronics, technology hyper efficient and distributed to the world. Steam, retained its position as an effective transport modality. Steampunk airships are flying around in the sky, and everybody gets to live in constructive, mutual, beneficial freedom and happiness, because now we've got basically a free energy system and, longitudinal current distributed through the crust of the earth, a great conductor amplified by the Schumann resonance in a constructive wavelength interface, and basically everybody gets to live exactly how they want. We have rules and laws, but still people take care of themselves, and they get to ingest whatever plant medicine they want into their body as long as they don't hurt anybody. Hey, that's the rules, okay? And you harm none, do what you will. But that's my message today. It's just funny. The climate cult is going to probably try and take the spotlight again here pretty soon, because again they think that's their best card. But it's funny, even in the polls, it was several months ago, it was like, of all the issues that voters care about, climate change was literally dead last. Nobody cares, because especially when we're talking, even if you believe the pandemic, propaganda, it's like, and the racism propaganda, it's still like the idea of the Earth getting 1 degree warmer over the span of 100 years sounds so utterly non-threatening. It's hard to even convey in English words. But it's all good. They won't get their global government, or if they do, it'll be only a fleeting success before the whole thing collapses. It'll be like the Obamacare website, and just a brief, just pathetic exercise in pseudo-socialism. But again, the underlying thing, as I've pointed out many times, is that the fatal flaw of socialism and the cabal and their whole program is that the people who believe in it are stunted. They're inbred. They're very dumb. They have positions of power. They think themselves to be very clever, and in certain ways they are, but they have no self-control. They have no constructive advice checking them. And so basically they go all along their merry way with these programs, and they think that they can just get away with anything, and then the whole thing collapses because they tried for too much and they lost the plot, and time to fold. Alright, so anyway, that's my video today. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.